Let's get started. Hi, everybody. My name is Kim Richter. I'm a senior research specialist at the Getty Research Institute, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to the first session of the new series called Curriculum Workshops for Higher Ed. And in this first episode, we will explore how to use the Digital Florentine Codex, Códice Florentino Digital, as a teaching resource and to bring Nahua voices and experiences into your classroom. And I'm extremely pleased to welcome my wonderful colleagues here, our speakers, who have been using the Florentine Codex, Digital Florentine Codex for teaching, and will share their experiences with you. So hopefully you can take away some ideas of how you can integrate the DFC, as we call it, into your teaching. So we have Amy Buono here from Chapman University, Mackenzie Cooley from Hamilton College, Chris Gilman from the UCLA Library and Digital Library Program, Lisa Sousa from Occidental College, and Roxanne Valle from UCLA, who has the distinguished presence here of having been an undergraduate many years ago in Lisa's class, and then is now a doctoral student at UCLA and worked also with us on the Digital Florentine Codex. So I'm very pleased to share the space with all of them. Now, before we begin, I would like to, let me see if I can, there we go. I would like to acknowledge that the land the Getty inhabits today was once known as Tovangar, the home of the Gabrielino and Tongva people. We shall show our respects to the Gabrielino Tongva people as well as all First People, past, present, and future, and honor their labor as original caretakers of this land. Getty commits to building relationships with the Gabrielino and Tongva community, and we invite you to acknowledge the history of this land and join us in caring for it. And it's important to note that, like Nahuatl, the language recorded in the Florentine Codex, and which will be the subject today in part, Tongva belongs to the Uto-Aztecan language family. These languages were and are spoken throughout North America and are a testament to the deep historical connections of diverse indigenous groups who transcended past and present boundaries for millennia. And it is in this spirit that we created the Digital Florentine Codex and as an enduring testimony to Nahua language and culture. And now I'm pleased to present my colleague Rebecca Peabody, Head of Research and Academic Outreach, who recorded a few words of welcome.
Hello to our faculty curriculum workshop featuring the Florentine Codex. I'm Rebecca Peabody, Head of Research Projects and Academic Outreach at the Getty Research Institute, and it is a pleasure to be here with you today, virtually, if not in person. One of our goals for academic outreach at the Getty Research Institute is to deepen and strengthen our relationships with our faculty colleagues in the region and beyond. And it is in this spirit that we started the Faculty Curriculum Workshop series, using the institutional research projects at the GRI as the point of departure for workshops such as this one, in which we share some of the research we've generated over the course of the research project in the form of materials that are classroom friendly and hopefully syllabus friendly. Our hope is that our faculty colleagues will find this material useful in their own classroom teaching. Each of these workshops will be recorded and eventually stored on our website where they can be accessed and will develop over time into an ever-growing library of resource materials. That website is not available yet, but it will be any day now. When it is up, it can be found under getty.edu, Projects and Initiatives, Academic Outreach. Please let us know what you think and how we can make this series more helpful, and thank you for coming. And with that, I turn things back over to the Florentine Codex team.
Great. So now I'm very pleased to present to you the Digital Florentine Codex, Códice Florentino Digital, which launched in October 2023. And we've been making changes to that I will show you as well, small tweaks here and there. But before I walk you through the site, I will introduce you to the manuscript and tell you a bit about how the DFC, as we call it, was produced. The story of the Florentine Codex takes place in Tlatelolco, the sister city of Tenochtitlan, the capital of the Mexica people and of the Aztec Empire. Prior to the invasion of the Spaniards, both cities, so this is before the invasion of the Spaniards, both cities are buried today below Mexico City. Now picture this. It is 1576. A Spanish Franciscan friar and a group of Nahua scholars and artists sit in the scriptorium of the first European institution of higher learning in the Americas. Outside the college, indigenous people were dying of one of the worst epidemics in recorded history, the Great Pestilence of 1576. The team worked tirelessly to complete the magnum opus, La Historia General de las Cosas de Nueva España, known today as the Florentine Codex. The Codex is the most important manuscript created in 16th century New Spain because of its encyclopedic content about pre-Hispanic and early colonial Mexico. It was created between 1575 and 77, though compiling the information took 3 decades. It is the product of a large-scale collaboration between the Spanish Franciscan friar Bernardino de Sahagún and a team of indigenous Nahua collaborators, many of whom were trained by Sahagún at the Colegio. Their names are listed here. However, in their research, our team identified a total of 9 scribal hands and around 20 artist hands. So clearly many more Nahua collaborators were involved. The Codex was sent to Spain shortly after completion, but ended up in the hands of the Medici family by 1587. It has remained in Florence at the Biblioteca Medicea Laurentiana ever since. The Florentine Codex has 12 illuminated books amounting to almost 2,500 pages. Bound into 3 volumes, it is a bilingual manuscript with 2 columns of text, Spanish on the left, Nahuatl on the right. Sahagún's Spanish translation paraphrases the Nahuatl, so although complementary, the 2 texts are often distinct. Modeled on Roman and medieval encyclopedias, the Codex addresses topics ranging from medicine to astronomy, in addition to Book 12, which is a Mexica account of the Spanish invasion. Because the images provide such critical information in addition to the 2 alphabetic texts, we think of these images as a third narrative. To unlock this encyclopedic content and make it searchable, the DFC brings the transcriptions and translations of the Nahuatl and Spanish texts and the digitized codex together. And here are all the texts that we unified in the DFC. To make the codex's images searchable and to draw out the content of the third narrative, our team conducted extensive iconographic and stylistic research and tagged each of the images of the DFC with multilingual keywords in classical Nahuatl, Huasteca Nahuatl, Spanish, and English. Additionally, because we are faced with many orthographic variants in the Florentine Codex, the team captured variant spellings. For example, for the word feather, ihuitl, there are at least 5 variants used in the Codex. We contributed many of these terms to the Getty vocabularies. With our contribution of Nahuatl terminology, we're expanding the focus of the Getty's multilingual and multicultural thesauri so that other people and institutions can freely use terms to describe Nahuatl heritage. Please note how in this entry for the ritual object Tlachialoni, the team captured variant spellings. With around 1.5 million speakers, Nahuatl is considered an endangered language. By collaborating with native Nahua speakers at the Language Institute IDIES, we're supporting efforts to revitalize the language and provide access to primary source content about Nahua history. The Florentine Codex is a massive compendium of information, nearly 2,500 handwritten pages with nearly as many images. To make the Digital Florentine Codex, the digitized folios of the codex were combined with an impressive quantity of data, data that was created but in the old-fashioned way by humans by hand. The DFC aggregates audio files, plain texts, multilingual vocabularies, and a staggering number of keywords or tags assigned to the images of the codex so that they can be searchable. So now let's do a little walkthrough. So usually when you open up the page, you will see a little space to accept cookies. Please always accept the cookies so that we have a sense of how many people are using the Florentine Codex, because that will allow us to argue for maintaining and getting resources to keep it alive. So please accept the cookies. Okay, so the entire interface is bilingual in English and Spanish, and you can make this selection here in the upper right corner. Here is Spanish, and here is English. From the homepage, you can search via keywords right up here at the top, or you can scroll down to explore the codex based on curated browsing categories. Here we have books of the codex, deities, occupations, everyday Nahuatl, which is my favorite category, and individuals and animals. So let's explore everyday Nahuatl. And this topic here, Quetzal. Hovering over the image, you can see the option to search the texts or the images. Let's select images. And now these are all the images tagged with the word Quetzal. Over here on the left side, you can see that you can narrow the search by filtering, by these filters. And so if I want to see, for example, all the images with Quetzal feathers in them in book 9, I click on this and that narrows the selection. This is the Book of Merchants. So from here, we can scroll down and select a specific image, one of these feather workers. Here, the image is enlarged and basic information is provided over here. And scrolling down to the keyword images, we've exposed the multilingual tags that describe this image. And this is the data that relates to the Getty vocabularies here. Clicking on any of these keywords will generate a new search, such as Tlaquilo Q or Artist Q. So what you see here are all the images that our team identified as made by the hand of Artist Q. That is just, I always love this page because it's just incredible to have that at hand. Now we can do a keyword search and we'll type in Malintzin. And here you can see I can again search either text or images. And this indeed searches different data. These are all the text searches and these are all the tags for the images. So let's do a text search. And let's pick book 12, folio 26, which is arguably one of the most famous images of Malintzin. So here you see the 3 narratives view. This is the heart of the DFC because you can access 3 narratives together. The 2 texts, the Spanish and the Nahuatl, and the images. Because Book 12 presents a unique historical narrative of the conquest of Mexico from the perspective of the Mexicas, we included additional content such as audio recordings of the Nahuatl text. So here you can select which texts you want to have, or if you want to have all of them, you can just scroll down here, or we can listen to the audio recording done by Eduardo de la Cruz Cruz. So let's take a listen.
We in Malinzi au in Oncacac, in Marques in Tlatol y Motecosoma, Nima in Ye, Kiwal Nahuatilla in Malinzi, Kiwal Popolots, Kiwalito in Popolochcopa.
You can also find a simpler interface of the Florentine Codex if you click on this icon at the top here, This is what we call the Zen view. And then you can just leaf through the here. You have the thumbnails view. And then you can click out of this up here by the little X, and that returns you to the three narratives view. And so we're also very excited to show you the recently launched resources page section here, in which 7 scholarly essays provide historical perspectives on the Florentine Codex. They also have an overview detailing the creation of the DFC, deep dives into research and methodologies employed for the creation of the DFC, translation philosophies, etc. And also in this section is a glossary of 1,700 Nahuatl terms to support the Spanish to English translation of books 1 through 11 done by Leon Garcia Garagasa. And then under About, we've also made new information available. You can find this here, the citations and permissions guide that is very useful. And this here, you can sort of see how ideally to cite the various parts of the DFC, from the original manuscript to images, translations, and transcriptions. And that is it. I'm going to return very briefly, hold on, to my slideshow. There we go. Just to say that all of this DFC work was accomplished by a huge number of people and institutions, including our institutional collaborators, without whom this wouldn't have been possible. And many of the people here on screen were helpful in creating this Digital Florentine Codex, and many colleagues at the Getty and beyond. And we're really, really grateful for all their fantastic contributions. Okay, and now I'm happy to hand this over to Christopher Gilman from UCLA, who has been working with our speakers to help figure out how to integrate the DFC into their teaching.
Hey, can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Fantastic. Okay, wonderful to see everybody. Thank you, Kim, for arranging. Thank you to the Getty Research Institute. I'm going to speak for a few minutes now and give you sort of a general overview of some of the things that you'll see and ideally touch, click through. And then after our presentations, we'll return and lead everybody through a demo. So just a little bit about myself. I'm the Digital Curriculum Program Coordinator at the UCLA Library Digital Library Program. We oversee UCLA's library digital collections. And I'm the founding co-chair of the IIIF Community Group for Education, along with Ben Johnston and my colleague at UCLA, Chenling Liu Zilioni, who are both in this meeting. And I want to call them out and thank them for help and support in preparing these materials and some of the technologies involved. So why am I telling you about IIIF? We're going to get a little bit, we'll roll up our sleeves and deal with some matters of standards and technologies, a lot of acronyms. But I want to kind of underscore that at the heart of this are 3 old books, and we've been working on a kind of a curricular model that helps you keep track of that basic underlying idea while developing proficiencies that allow you, your students, and others to rigorously engage it with the best affordances that we have available. I'm going to underscore a couple points here. One is literacy, and I think there's no better model to start with than the Florentine Codex, to the extent that it has multiple literacies most notably Spanish, Nahuatl, and the recognized third narrative of imagery. And in that spirit, we've developed an approach using the learning management system of all things. In this case, it's Canvas. And for those of you who have um, gone through the hoops of getting yourself registered, you will have access to this Canvas course site that we'll use for presentation and for demonstration. The course site will remain open. You're welcome to continue to use it. Our hope is that if any of it interests you a little bit or the whole thing, that you'll reach out and seek further collaboration. This is a small network of scholar educators. We mostly know each other and have for some time and are committed to growing this as a resource for education and see its great potential. But it's really all about people-to-people networks. Okay, so here we are on this Canvas course site homepage. It may look a little different for to those of you who are used to using a learning management system for, let's say, PDFs or for readings or due dates or other kinds of kind of clerical or administrative functions of a course. In this case, the course is designed as a rich media learning environment. I've put in the color scheme and some of the ornament of the Digital Florentine Codex. It does not have the polish of the DFC itself and isn't intended to. This is a course site. Um, uh, while we're here, I'll call out the basic structure. This is a course template that we developed to facilitate student scaffolded engagement with collections, learning proficiencies such as annotation or comparative analysis, and ideally or ultimately through to project creation in a platform such as Scalar, and we'll have an example of that. So these are pretty ambitious learning goals for a whole course, but because they're structured and managed um, um, in the learning management system, um, they generally succeed in getting you through the entire process. So very quickly, we have it blocked out in three sections or modules: materials, methods, and products. In this course site, as we've set it up, I've used it to kind of block out three different types of learning activities. So I'm going to click over here to modules. You can also go directly to each individual module from the links at the bottom. And I'm going to scroll through. I'm going to show you these three sections. The materials is a sequence of 7 learning activities, and these were used in various form in the courses taught by the participants here. These are largely about technology and affordances. Um, the methods is about more substantive matters related to discipline. These get into big concept ideas such as the third text or reading between the lines. These are coming directly from live scholarship with the community who have worked on the Florentine Codex for some time. And then the last, we have a lab activity and an example of a Scalar student page. So this is in Amy's class, one example of what students can do as a culminating assignment in a course. And then at the end, a series of things like lesson plans and templates and so forth that might be useful in one fashion or another. I'm just going to click here quickly into a template. that can help explain sort of the structure of a Canvas-based page in a discussion forum that we call a lab activity. And this is a sequence that is flexible, but generally starts with these component elements that take a student through a big idea to some examples, some materials, introduces a tool, and then asks them to create something that they post in the discussion board. And by doing that, they learn a proficiency or they learn some key concept related to, in this case, the Florentine Codex. They do it hands-on and they do it collaboratively. They see each other's work. So this is the basic structure. And then I'll click back into just a quick sense of what that might look like. So here is one lab activity that teaches about what is IIIF, what does it stand for, what does it do, and so forth. It has some words. It has an embedded little bit of media that interacts, so you can click through it. A 3D representation or model, and then prompts to click and submit some kind of response. So they tend to be, I like to think, maybe a little bit funny or lighthearted, at the same time that they're intellectually challenging. When we get into some of the more substantive ones that our other participants will tell you about, then we get into some of the big ideas, the citation of a real scholar, actual examples of a little bit of analysis, and then some materials that have been extracted from the Digital Florentine Codex for use in this site. And this is where I'm going to get to IIIF. So again, the International Image Interoperability Framework. It is a standard by which many major cultural heritage institutions, libraries, museums, galleries, and archives make their digitized content available on the web in such a fashion that it can be worked with together. So if you want to look at an illuminated manuscript that is sourced from, let's say, Oxford's Bodleian Library, along with one at the Getty, you can put them together in a viewer, see them together, and then work with them with embedded cropping tools. So we'll get to this in the demo. This is a tool we call Mixtape that we created to aggregate these materials. In this case, it is the 3 volumes of the Digital Florentine Codex, the digital facsimiles, pulled out and viewable separately, so that you can do various operations with them and work directly with the digitized texts. So these are developed in collaboration with the scholars. Because we've made these as a kind of a template, we're willing to share them. We'd love to see others pick them up and use them. They're in the Canvas learning management system, which readily supports transfer from one to the other, but it's also in principle transferable from one learning management system to another. So we do this in learning management systems because then the students can click through, use hard evidence, reason inductively with the materials they have, work together collaboratively, and get credit for it in the class. And as instructors, you can see transparently who's getting it, who's not getting it, where are the good ideas coming from, and how do you cultivate those to help teach the others. So it's a very responsive approach, I think, and it's also kind of managed down to the level that every student learns something. It's completely inclusive. As a caveat, we're working on accessibility for visually impaired students, but aren't there yet. Okay, so I should probably leave off there and keep the rest for the hands-on portion of the demo and pass it along to my friend and former colleague from Occidental College, Lisa Sousa.
Great, thanks everyone. Let me just get my PowerPoint up here. Oh, sorry, just a sec. Okay, great. So hello, everyone. I'm so pleased to be able to participate in the first workshop for higher education. And I want to thank Sue and Brianna for getting us all organized, my fellow presenters, the audience, and especially Kim and Chris. I'm a professor of history at Occidental College, and the course that I'm going to talk to you about is my course that's a 200 level history course called Remembering the Conquest of Mexico. I'm teaching the course this semester. I have 24 students. Most of them are first year and second year students. And I have relatively few history majors and minors just because the students haven't gotten to the point of declaring a major yet. Over the years, I've used the Florentine Codex in a lot of my different classes, but because we did not have anything equivalent to the DFC, I would have to curate images and put them in a PowerPoint for students, or perhaps select text from book 6, which has these wonderful Nahuatl speeches, or excerpts from book 12, which provides the Nahuatl account of the conquest. And so I really want to thank Chris for helping me develop these materials that I'm going to be talking about today. The first thing I wanted to just say is that I really wanted with my course to have students develop a kind of deeper understanding of Nahua views of the conquest by doing a kind of deep dive into book 12. And so that required me giving up lecture time and not just telling them what it said, but having them explore what it said. And I love that because students do history instead of just hearing about history passively. In the course of doing this, the students engaged in meaningful conversations. They were really grappling with concepts and different types of evidence. And I'm happy to share some examples of that later in the Q&A. But also, I think it allowed students to really reflect on what they were learning and its significance. The DFC is wonderful, as Chris pointed out. It's a multilingual text in Nahuatl and Spanish. And then we had also, English translations we were working with. It is a text with multiple literacies, so both alphabetic writing and visual writing. These different texts reveal multiple perspectives. For me, it's a very useful book to just talk about colonial relations and relations of power as a work that was produced in a colonial context. And of course, now the DFC provides these incredible features that make the text much more usable for our students. So basically what I did in my class was I had students prepare a 10-minute group presentation. And the idea was taking advantage of the fact that the DFC provides us with the 3 texts of the Florentine Codex. In other words, the Nahuatl narrative, the Spanish narrative, and the visual images. My students read Kevin Teresiano's articles on reading between the lines and the 3 texts of the Florentine Codex. So they had some introduction to those concepts. The students were required to provide 8 quotes in Nahuatl and or Spanish and 8 images all images and texts had to have proper citations, and the images had to have captions. I asked the students to go beyond just like each preparing like a couple of examples each and then not having any coherence. So they were forced to develop a thesis, and this really engaged them in deep discussion that went beyond like superficial, like here's an image of Malincine, where they had to connect it with the types of evidence that their peers were providing. And I also asked that all members speak during the presentation. I divided the students into 6 different groups. I was modeling Nahuatl socio-political organizations, so they were Calpuli or subunits of our class, which is in Altepet. And I emphasized the importance of collaborative work. It's the spirit that is central to being a member of an Indigenous community. Even today, it was central to Nahua socio-political organization. I believe that it was central to the spirit with which the Nahua scribes worked together on producing the Florentine Codex in the Colegio de Santa Cruz Tlatelolco. And I think it was very much the spirit with which all of us came together to work on the DFC. Over the course of 2 weeks, students did a number of lab activities, so different scaffolding assignments that allowed them to learn to cite, to find evidence, to do visual analysis. And just for the sake of time, I'm going to run up to the exercise that Krista shared on the shared Canvas website that I developed that was sort of the core that allowed them to bring together all the material they needed. This was an exercise they did outside of class, and then they had in-class time to discuss what they had found and what they were bringing to their groups to use as the starting point for building their presentations. They were basically asked to read and select 3 quotes from the Nahuatl, provide the Spanish translation if one existed, and the image, and then to start to compare the discrepancies and similarities in the different texts. And that's what they brought together through that share function or reply function that you'll see on the Canvas websites. And then finally, I just wanted to share a couple of comments that students gave on their self-evaluations of their presentations. Let me go back here. One student commented, I learned good technical skills from utilizing digitized documents, something that I'm sure will only become more relevant the more documents are digitized. I also felt that searching the codex helped me understand more deeply how it was made. Another student commented on learning a lot from the different perspectives and that they learned about analyzing art. And one thing I appreciated was that this student recognized that by speaking to each other, they noticed comparisons they hadn't seen before when they were just each individually working on the text. One student commented, I learned from selecting, organizing, and compiling the images to analyze visual sources in a historical context. So I very much liked that. But finally, I just wanted to share the last image here that's where this student commented on other things they learned. One student said, working with the DFC helped deepen my understanding of Nahua memories of the conquest by highlighting their perspective on war, cultural loss, and suffering. The images vividly depict these themes, complementing the text's emotional depth. Comparing the Nahuatl and Spanish versions reveals biases and shifts in meaning, show how language shapes historical narratives, and reflecting the power dynamics of who records history. Another student said that he gained appreciation for the work of Nahua writers. And then finally, the last comment, working closely with the images and texts of the DFC, I understood on a deeper level the physical and psychological consequences of conquest. Grappling with similarities and differences between the texts allowed me to gain a fuller picture of the conquest and how certain narratives try to erase or reshape important truths about this time. I think for those of us who teach history, those last three comments were especially rewarding. The comments demonstrate the power of history to foster respect and empathy for others. And it showed how the students understood that history is contested. And so while we're living in very fraught times when there are some who want to rewrite history or erase history, I think this was a very meaningful exercise because if we can get our students to leave our history classrooms with deeper respect, more empathy, and appreciation for contested narratives, I think we've done the very best work we can do in our history classes. And that was made possible by this deep analysis of the DFC. Thank you.
Roxanne, I think you're up next. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Lisa. One moment. Okay, we're good. Awesome. So it's honestly with great pleasure that I'm able to provide a former student's perspective on integrating the DFC into classroom curricula. So I actually took Lisa's history class in 2019 during my final semester as an undergrad. I was a member of Kaupuli 4, working with my group to analyze the representation of Malincine in Book 12. So Malincine is widely known as the young Nahua woman who interpreted Mayan and Nahuatl for Hernando Cortés and Moctezuma. In our group, we closely examined her legacy as remembered in Book 12 and in broader histories, asking questions related to gender, race, sexuality, and other critical, necessary inquiries, such as those related to her name. The goal for us students was to replicate the process of making the Digital Florentine Codex. So we can take a look at an example of our group's finished submitted project. So scrolling through the table of contents of the course-wide scalar, the platform we used for the assignments titled Nahua Histories of the Conquest of Mexico, Book 12 of the Florentine Codex, we can see the final result of remembering Malincine. The top includes a brief introduction or abstract describing the project to the viewer. We added the scroll to the bottom shortcut because, as a group, we decided to order the images to be read from the bottom to the top in the manner of some Mesoamerican codices. The outlined box indicate on the images where we inserted annotations, such as explanations of the depicted animals, tagging Malincine where she is present, integrating links to museum collections, and brief descriptions of the Nahua iconography. In this image in Malincine, our group integrated 2 audio recordings and included a description of her hair as styled in the tradition of a married Nahua woman. And we also labeled the speech scrolls that indicate an exchange of dialogue. Overall, we intended to capture her critical role in the general narrative of our group scalar. In the process, we were taught how sciences, social sciences, and humanities can be applied together to follow research interests and complete innovative scholarship. There are many results that can follow when including the DFC into the classroom, and I would like to speak further to the personal outcomes that I've experienced since History 355 and that have positively transformed my professional goals. So because of the interdisciplinary projects we did in History 355 based on the DFC, I was inspired to change my career path and academic plans. The opportunity to study my heritage country, my parents are both from Mexico, through these interesting technology-based projects motivated me as I realized that aspects of myself, such as my multilingual skills, can be applied in professional settings. Furthermore, it felt as if I was getting career experiences in the classroom, learning about different fields and jobs I had not known before as a first-gen student. So being able to collaborate with other institutions, meeting guest scholars, and learning about other resources during class time broadened my academic and career perspectives in ways that I did not otherwise access. Following my BA, I went to get a master's in Latin American Studies at UCLA, where I even took the individual project I completed for Lisa's class and expanded it for my master's thesis. And then following graduation, I was actually able to participate as a peer reviewer for the DFC initiative, helping the scribal hand identification team determine 9 total scribes who authored the Nahuatl, Spanish, and Latin texts of the Florentine Codex. So their different styles of writing are pictured here. And most recently, this past fall, I just started my first year in UCLA's History PhD program, where I continue studying Mesoamerican manuscripts, the Florentine Codex specifically, and especially using the DFC, and where I aim to apply to and complete the graduate certificate program in digital humanities. These goals are still undoubtedly influenced by Lisa's course. So, as shown by my experiences, I'm also a huge supporter for integrating the DFC into the classroom. Applying the DFC, whether for a brief unit or inspiration for a semester-long plan, such as seen in Lisa's history class, or even as an in-class activity or a primary source for reading, which I did this past January for my first time guest lecturing, it can facilitate new interests for students that lead to meaningful academic, career, and personal outcomes. Thank you. And next we have Amy.
Amy, you have to unmute yourself.
My apologies, everyone. Hi. My name is Amy Buono. I'm an art historian at Chapman University in Southern California. And I had the pleasure this past spring, 2024, so about a year ago, of teaching a course, an art history course, an upper division one, on the arts of Tenochtitlan, Mexico City. This was embedded in a series of classes we had in our department on sort of various cities, both historical and in the contemporary world. And I was very much interested in figuring out ways to embed the Digital Florentine Codex as this amazing primary source within the context of a class about this, right, the city of Tenochtitlan, how it transforms into Mexico City in the framework of this 300-year period that we took as our case study. And I was very much invested in thinking through how to teach this class in relation to kind of comparative ways of seeing the world, Indigenous and Spanish, and taking the issue of multiple literacies very seriously with the class at large. So I'm going to be echoing a lot of the comments of both Lisa and Roxanne's amazing presentation from a student perspective, thinking through also sort of how that worked in my course. So, see. So Christopher Gilman partnered up with our class. He had long been working with various members of our department, our history program at Chapman, with initiating scalar projects. And so I was really lucky to partner with him to develop different modules for this course. This is a shot of my class. In front of the mural at Chapman. And we really, I especially as a professor, really wanted to think through the advantages of a multilingual classroom in relation to teaching the Digital Florentine Codex. We had an extremely diverse class, first-gen students, international students. I think we counted something like 6 or 7 working languages that the students spoke just within our class. And it was really important to me to have the students really think through sort of ideas of translation. What happens and what ruptures in these acts of translation, right, in the 16th century, and how can they think through that through the lens of their own lives and the multiple languages and cultures that they live on a daily basis. So I'm just going to go through one exercise. Roxanne just introduced the idea of doing scalar projects, and that was what we did in at our class at Chapman as well. Scalar is a digital publishing and exhibition platform that enables authors, all of us, all of you to create projects that emphasize and make use of different forms of media resources. Scalar had been used in the context of our university, specifically with the art collection and our gallery, to produce different forms of virtual exhibitions. And it was especially helpful during the COVID years, right, to produce exhibition content when people couldn't physically go into spaces. So all of the different modules that Chris has built on this that we're all going to see were things that our class worked through all semester to develop the technical skills to then at the end of class be able to produce what we called a Codex Chapman, where they collectively worked again collaboratively and in groups, again with that same spirit that Roxanne talked about, that Lisa employed in her class, for the students to work together in teams to come up with their final projects. And so this is just a screenshot of our Scalar project. Chris has actually embedded a link to this into the Canvas website, so you can all peruse it at your leisure later. And what I actually did is our class collectively decided on thematic topics that they themselves wanted to work through together. So the class was broken into 7 groups. They chose the topics they wanted to work on based on sort of working through the Digital Florentine Codex on their own and in groups to kind of refine what was most interesting to them. And I really kept it open for the students. So the first group worked on foodways and food and ritual. The second group worked on plants, animals, and the natural world. The third group worked on herbal medicine and healing. The fourth group worked on merchants and traders. The fifth group worked on astrology and divination in the Nahua world. The sixth group worked on the role of women and gender and identity. And then group 7 worked on the education of children. And so these were things that were interesting to them, that they refined with each other in these groups. And I really encouraged also the Spanish speakers in class. We had many first-gen students of Mexican descent that actually really wanted to work through the Spanish text as well and present parts of their projects in Spanish, which I also thought was really wonderful to harness that in class. The instructions, I'm just showing you some of the instructions here. Your group should choose a selection of images to contextualize the group page, as well as an image detailer too. Each member should choose at least 3 images to examine in detail, along with related texts, and provide 2 or 3 annotations and an image detail or 2. And then finally, you should work together as a group, right, to figure out how to arrange your themes so that you each have an introduction to your topic and that each of you analyze a particular concept within that topic. Remember, think about how this will make sense presenting this to a class. And because this was an art history class, and because I wanted to take seriously images as a textual form in the Nahua world, it was really important that they sort of thought through finding the images that were most interesting and sort of going from there to kind of extrapolate and work with both the Spanish and the Nahuatl text that was available. Here, I just wanted to give you one example, and the students have given their consent to show this. I had one student, Maggie, who worked in the food group, where they each worked on some item in the Florentine Codex connected to food or foodways to kind of elaborate on. She worked through the issue of maize and came up with the title, The Flesh of the Sun God, was interested in sort of figuring out and opening up this whole world of maize as this cultural form in central Mexico. She included a series of images per the instructions. She annotated them. She connected to different thematics that we had gone through during the semester. And so built upon the kind of technical skills that she had learned and came up with a really, really beautiful project that was exciting to her. And her first language is Chinese. And so she really was excited also by multiple literacies, this idea of working through this material and thinking through sort of acts of translation. And I just wanted to, there were lots of feedback from the students. Some of it was published on a blog page that we actually did at the university. I just wanted to highlight one quote by Andrea Onofre, who was a sociology major and a Latinx and Latin American studies minor. We had many Latinx, Latin American studies students in the class. And she said, as for the Florentine Codex and working on our scalar pages, it is easy to say that coming in with a Mexican background, this felt heartwarming to read and see images that made just sense to me in my ancestral history. Researching on Nahua women, I was able to obtain new information as to what roles women up and took, and seeing how natural herbal remedies my mom uses were just taken from Nahua life. And so she was really transfixed by this idea of discovering these kind of deep roots. Working through the herbal medicine section of the book in relation to her family. And it was really kind of gratifying to sort of see that happen in real time. So it was a really exciting semester. It took a lot of work because we really did it on the fly because the DFC had just rolled out and Chris was, constructing these exercises sometimes a day or even hours before we went live in class. So it was really all hands on deck. But it was really exciting. And I think the student impressions told a lot. And I think what I learned doing this and what I would advise faculty to think about as they roll the DFC out on their own classes is also try to think about how you can reduce the amount of content that you cover while integrating a lot of these technical exercises, because it takes a lot of work for the students to build up a skill base to work with digital images in this material on top of covering, I think, the historical thematic units that you need to cover in a class to give them context. So I'll stop there and hand this off to the next participant. I think Mackenzie Cooley is next.
Hi, everybody. Can you see this deck? Excellent. Well, thank you so much. Well, I have to say, I'm so grateful to Kim for the chance to be included in this conversation. So many inspiring scholars here. And Amy, your class really was a model for my thinking this fall. And that's because of Chris acting as a bridge here. And I'm grateful to be a part of it. Um, I would like to spend my time thinking about grafting meaning or some really broad reflections on teaching, and the more I think about it, play, and engaging with the Digital Florentine Codex. When I think about knowledge production, which is really central to what I study, I think about the colonial world. And I reckon with both what grows and what's severed, right? The Nahua world was epistemologically severed, with some version of a European knowledge grafted onto it tremendously imperfectly. The Florentine Codex is not only a hybrid text, I really see it as a kind of grafted one, bearing the scars of that imposition and bearing new, vibrant fruit as a result of an interchange between different growth patterns. Um, and so, as many other speakers have said, I think that the opportunity that students have when engaging with the Florentine Codex is one of how to read a text that is so obviously multivocal. It is not a single coherent voice. Instead, it's layered and translated and edited and mediated. And I think that close reading really allows students to draw attention to these fractures and these joinings and what grew out of them. And I think that for my pedagogical work, I've come to think about digital tools as not only facilitating access, but transforming how students engage with primary sources. And I think that that often comes with a greater sense of play. Okay. So, I mean, when do I teach with the Digital Florentine Codex? The more I thought about it, the more I realized when don't I teach with the Digital Florentine Codex? I think that this site, this platform is in almost all of my classes in one way or another. We talk about it when we're in the scientific revolution, when we're thinking about making knowledge in the early modern world. I try to connect it to the real fundaments of the European and American intellectual narratives. I use it in my class on race science and the origins of the modern world to think about representations of likeness and difference across a wide geography. We talk about medicines and materia medica and secret and shared knowledge in bioprospecting and ecologies of medicine. And has been central to the activities that we've done in Latin America, history, culture, and society, the intro class to the Latin American and Latine studies program that we have just revived here at the college. So with that, I think that there are a whole number of things that students can see with kind of easy relevance for the study of history. We can see the history of natural history. So omnipresent in Book 11, depictions of difference, the Columbian Exchange, the flora and fauna and richness of growing that is all over this codex. There are also so many wonderful examples of indigenous knowledge in medicine and syncretic traditions of knowledge making and medicine making as well. But I'd like to talk very quickly about some other aspects, including how the DFC shows us different ways to think about narrating history, different ways to engage close reading in the classroom, and finally to build on an activity that Chris developed for my class on conquest, exquisite crops, how we can think about images in place and out of place and the meanings that accompany them in a digital format. So my class on conquest of the Americas really queries the idea of conquest and thinks very much about the history of violence and a history of war. One of the major activities that is a centerpiece of the class is an oral activity. It's a oral presentation of sorts. It's really about narrating history. Or thinking through how multiple voices both emphasized and were occluded in the making of historical narratives. And for that, each student selects a historical actor involved in Book 12. And I do this in conversation with the student. And we use the individuals section of the website actually in order to tease out who are the historical actors present in some of these moments. Sometimes students choose an individual mentioned in the text, and other students choose makers, right? And also consider the provenance of Book 12. Read through the whole of Book 12 in English, and then we work through that sometimes in Spanish, depending on the ability level of the class. And we discuss it for 2 weeks in advance of this assignment. And then each student prepares a 4 to 5 minute intervention in which they describe what was visible to the historical actor they've chosen to focus on. And we scaffold the entire class that day as a structured narrative. So where each historical actor appears in the narrative, they can have a moment to intervene. This shows us really some watershed moments, right? Searching for allies among European and indigenous actors, Moctezuma's captivity, the massacre at the Great Temple, and of course Noche Triste are some of them. But every time we do this activity, different moments stand out. And inevitably, it comes to a really fraught climax. It's a very hard class. And students often reflect on that difficulty, and we find a way to kind of move forward together. That varies based on the year. Out of this activity, I think we really see multiplicity in historical narratives, right? We see an insertion of particular dominance in the storytelling, but also its negotiation. By having to give this presentation not as a paper, although they do hand in a written paper, but as an oral assignment, it requires them to think about empathy as they start to think about the many others in the room with them, both their fellow students and those whose history they're discussing. They also, and this is a kind of history pedagogical thing. They have to structure the story as a lived sequence, and that requires that they think with a lot of care about chronology, and when different interventions shape a chronological narrative. And finally, and most importantly, this is an exercise in constructing and contesting authority in the writing of history. It's very hard to move away from this assignment with the sense of an unbiased history, right? Likewise, students do a lot of close reading in my classes, and but when it comes to the Florentine Codex, I try to use this assignment to ask them to slow down, to be surprised, and to empathize. Um, they pick one page of the Codex over a classroom period for which they've prepared in advance, and they just think broadly about what's happening here. It's an exercise in slow looking. The point is to not do other things. The point is to not triangulate through additional research, but to read the texts that are available on the page, brought together for us through the DFC, and to note your observations at the start and at the end of the focused analysis. We move so fast in a digital space in particular that actually one of the tools that students need in our present, I think, is to both engage quickly with digital items and to engage with slow and intensity with objects and histories in a digital platform. And the result of this exercise in slow looking tends to be generative, playful, and informal. And I guess I think that that's a really wonderful part of the DFC. You can play with it. Some students have discussed how to read between the lines of given narratives. One student noted how the Nahuatl description of the moon was alive with fearful stars fleeing. Others focused on deities that the Spanish they had read elsewhere dismissed as devils. And they note how the image tells a very different story. They respond reflecting on the tension between text and image, the preservation of Nahua's spiritual memory, even under colonial pressure. And finally, they are really aware of body language. They start thinking about how tone and body language are often lost in translation, and think about what parts of the codex preserve different types of information. And I would just like to conclude with a bit of a tee up to this really wonderful activity that Chris developed on exquisite crops. I'm a historian of science and ideas, and I see grafting as one of these really fascinating histories of a European technology, an Afro-Eurasian technology that was employed in New Spain over the colonial period. And through grafting, grafting tended to reproduce plants that were already known to be strong, while seeds, by contrast, introduced variability. In my book, The Perfection of Nature, I talk about how agricultural practice slipped into metaphor, and in turn, that slipped into social interactions and practical science. And so in this activity, we look at the Ozoticpac land maps from 1540 from the Library of Congress. And we think about this image. So this is really an exercise in metaphor, in semantic fields, and the negotiation of meaning, or really how to find new meanings through collage, play, and juxtaposition in digital sources. A lot of the work that Chris has been teaching these students, certainly through this activity, is about how images can be used in the digital space, and they can be combined and analyzed in new ways. I've thought a lot about that through conversations with Zoe Sadokierski and Katie Dean in their contributions to natural things. And in this book, which is really about following natural products in motion, for which they designed a number of collaged visuals, they think about what information is inherent in a natural item and how its ontology slips as it's relocated in the creation of modern science. And they did this kind of collaging work for their development of the visual in every chapter, including in Helen Burgo-Ellis's Pollen, The Sexual Life of Plants in Latin America. And as they pulled together all of these images and brought them together in a new way in conversation with the author of the chapter, that's actually not dissimilar to the activity that Chris and therefore I have kind of asked of these students when they're making exquisite crops. They think about how to make a kind of graft chimera that splices one scion, one species into the rootstock of another. But with that, I just want to say um, I am grateful for the DFC for the way in which it provokes big ideas. It makes this history more accessible, and it facilitates exercises that are not only really polished, but are also provocative for students who are learning in a whole variety of environments. And I can report back, it does move well between Canvas and Blackboard. The end.
Thank you. Well, without further ado, Chris, should we hop onto the hands-on demo? Thank you, everybody.
Yes, let's do it. I hope at least a fair number of you were able to register for the class and can click through. If you haven't, I encourage you still to do so. These are all designed as hybrid activities, which means they can be done in person in class, synchronously over Zoom, or they can be done as homework. So anything we don't cover, which is most of it, you're welcome to go through, click, and discover on your own. And you're also welcome to use those and to work with us to develop new ones if you're at all interested. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen again, and I want to maybe take you through two activities just to see an entry activity and the exquisite crops activity that Mackenzie was just describing. So I'm going to go to modules, and you can follow along with me. I also watch um, to the second activity in Unit 2 called Pictograph. This is a kind of a primer, particularly addressed to students who self-disqualify in classes because they're intimidated by a lot of digital humanities looking things like code. So we thought it would be really strategic to kind of stare the beast in the mouth and jump right in and deal with a lot of code and do it in a way that's fun. So I will walk through this, and then you're welcome to do it on your own here or afterwards. But the gist of the activity is to introduce them to code per se, and to show that it's a part of cultural traditions stretching way back and across the world. And in this case, the task is to copy this little block of code, which has certain formal qualities and I don't know, a kind of interest of its own, um, and then create a discussion post using HTML. And this is designed for people who don't use HTML. I use HTML on a day-to-day basis and don't know it. So it works for me. It should be able to work for everybody else. So I'm going to paste this code in to the HTML field. So this is the little HTML symbol. Um, and if you do it right, you should see some numbers on the side that indicate lines of code. And then if you flip it back, it turns into a Digital Florentine Codex slider puzzle, taking one of my favorite images and scrambling it. So that the task for the students is to unscramble the image. So you have good puzzle players out there. If you're on Safari, as I am right now, you can't slide it so directly. If you're in Chrome, you can just slide the pieces and they work pretty nicely. But I'm going to take one of these out and put it in, take this out and put it in. And in the process, what I'm effectively doing is changing the underlying HTML code for this table. On the surface of it, what we're asking of students is to look carefully at one single image. So just as Mackenzie was saying, looking closely and spending a little time, even if it's through this kind of obstruction to ask the students to solve a puzzle, in the end, they should just simply be able to do this task. And when they're done, they hit reply, and they send their answer, and everybody else can see how far along they got. I didn't get very far. Um, and then to take a moment and reflect on the code that they saw underneath it, right? So it's just a way to get them entered into working with these things and to appreciate the sort of minimal or threshold level of technology proficiencies that they're going to need to work with the Digital Florentine Codex. Okay, so I want to highlight one other that is a particular favorite of mine. It's this one. It's designed to teach students about how IIIF images work. You copy and you paste an image in here, and it generates a portion of a IIIF image. So I'll leave this to you to do on your own. It has embedded steps and all the activity that you would need to be able to do it. Okay, so that's that. Now I'm going to go back to modules and um, to exquisite crops. So for those of you who teach art, this will be intimately familiar. It's based on the surrealist game of exquisite corpse, and it synthesizes Mackenzie's scholarship on hybridity, or more exactly, the idea of the graft chimera. And can't tell you how excited I was when we first talked and realized that I was talking to an expert on the subject, who not only could speak authoritatively about it and steer this in the right direction, but also give this extraordinary example. So that land map is right here in a deep zooming viewer at the top, along with a quotation from Mackenzie here, and a link to a relevant article. So it's fun and interesting, but it is grounded in very high level scholarship, with some challenging concepts, but done in a way that is, let's say, how many lines is that? It's not that long before they jump right into some very rigorous material. Okay, so the activity, it's described here in this little section, and then we give examples, and each one unfolds to show, well, what is a chimera? So here's an example of a chimera. You can look at that. It's very pretty. It describes what is the game itself and gives some examples of what the surrealists did. Who wouldn't want to see that, right? And then it places it in the context of the Florentine Codex itself in versions of this kind of hybridity or sort of recombinant beings and creatures that manifest as a concept. Okay, so now we have here the three volumes of the Florentine Codex with built-in tools for cropping that we would use for the activity. And the task is to do a post that combines two kinds of images, let's say a plant and a human, or two parts of two different animals, or other things, and uses the combined imagery or the mashup, if you will, to generate this kind of third thing, the concept that is created by sticking these two things together. And critically, a graft chimera, as opposed to a hybrid, is a kind of a Mackenzie, please correct me. It's sort of it's an ugly monstrosity, or an uncomfortable tension between things where character traits of each are manifest. So it's not a blur. It's not this kind of comfortable, soft notion of a hybrid. It is a being in active tension with itself. So if you click on the little cropping tool at the bottom of any item, you'll see that volume of the Digital Florentine Codex appear with all of these different thumbnails for each one. I'm scrolling through in search of some image. That's not big enough. Here's one. And you can see the images are super high resolution, they're usable, and I'm just going to crop a body. I'm going to use that, and now I'm going to maybe do something else. And what do we have? Well, I'm going to take a feather of whatever this is. Anybody know?
Feathers.
Feathers. Okay. So I've got two items. I'm going to see if I can put them into my discussion post. Right over here is a little copy icon. This will take the item and allow me to paste it directly into my discussion. Copy this one too. To say this is probably not the best performance of this task, but technically you get where I'm headed. Well, that's a different kind of hybrid than I expected. Um, but but you get the point. You're taking bits and pieces. You search through the entire Florentine Codex. And by the way, you should see each one of these items once they're pasted in here to the to the discussion forum is a live link to this item that if you click on it should load it again as a well, that's not what I wanted to see. Never mind what I just did. Um, that's not what I wanted to see happen. It should load the item in a separate Mirador viewer. Okay, so just to kind of give you a sense here, each of these activities has has some kind of beginning point with a big idea, a few examples, maybe some references, a tool, a process, the instructions, and then an outcome. And as an instructor, you should be able to see, are my students getting it? Did they reflect in a way that indicates that they're on the verge of understanding something amazing, or that maybe they're speculating in a reasonable way, but that's wrong? And I can explain. Actually, what's interesting about it is exactly the opposite of what you said. So, as in Lisa's class just yesterday, students give final presentations, but they're informed by posts that they do in these kinds of activities.